Picture a street with no electricity and no street lights and no glow from any window anywhere. The darkness is not just the absence of light. It is the kind of darkness you feel on your skin, the kind that makes you reach out your hand to check whether something is there. And somewhere in that darkness, at a distance you cannot yet measure, a procession is coming. You can hear it before you can see it, singing, getting louder, and somewhere in the crowd moving toward you, people are carrying fire. If your flame is burning when that procession reaches you, you join it. You walk with it into the feast that has been prepared. If your flame is out, the procession walks past you in the dark, and you are just another shadow the wedding night leaves behind. That is the setup. That is the opening image of one of the most misunderstood parables Jesus ever told. Most people read Matthew 25 and walk away, thinking this is a story about being ready, and it is, but that word ready is doing far more work than we usually give it credit for, because Jesus is not talking about people who forgot to set an alarm. He is not describing people who meant to prepare and simply ran out of time. He is describing two groups who looked completely identical for months, possibly for years, people whose difference only became visible when the fire went out. The real question of this parable is not, "Are you ready?" It is this, "What are you carrying that nobody can see?" And there is one word in this parable that changes who the whole story is actually about. Most readers walk right past it. It is sitting in the first verse of Matthew 25. In the original Greek, and it shifts the entire target audience of Jesus' warning, "We will get there, but not yet." To feel the weight of this story, you need to understand where Jesus is sitting when he tells it. He is on the Mount of Olives, just days before his crucifixion. His disciples have asked him the biggest question they know how to ask. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Matthew 24 builds the answer with images that have kept interpreters busy for 2,000 years. False prophets, wars, earthquakes, the love of many growing cold. And then Matthew 25 opens with a story about a wedding. That shift is not accidental. Jesus does not answer the question about the end of the world with a timeline or a calendar or a sequence of signs. He answers it with a love story. A bridegroom is coming for his bride. And the first thing you need to understand is how a Jewish wedding actually worked. Because without that, this parable is just a strange little tale about sleepy girls and an oil shortage. Stay with me, because the cultural context behind this story is the very thing that makes it land. In the Jewish world of Jesus' day, a wedding did not happen in a single afternoon. It unfolded in 3 distinct stages across a period of months or sometimes more than a year. The first stage was the engagement, arranged by the fathers of the 2 families, often before the couple had spent significant time together. The second stage was the betrothal, a binding covenant that was legally almost as serious as the marriage itself. If you were betrothed and something happened to your intended, you were considered a widow or widower. It was that binding. And then came the third stage, the arrival. After a period of preparation at his father's house, the groom would come to collect his bride and bring her back to the home where they would begin their life together. But here is the detail that changes everything about this parable. The bride did not know exactly when he was coming. The father of the groom was the one who decided when the house was ready, when the preparations were complete, when the time was right. So the bride and her attendants waited. They knew the season. They knew it was close. But the exact night, the exact hour, that was a surprise. And when the groom finally came, it was almost always at night, because that was the tradition. A procession would wind through the village streets with singing and shouting and fire lighting the way. And if you were a member of the wedding party, your job was to be burning when he appeared. Your fire was your identification. Your flame was your invitation. Without it, you were indistinguishable from anyone else standing in the dark. Now pay attention to this, because the very first word study in this passage changes everything about the physical picture most people have in their minds. Matthew 25. One says the 10 virgins took their lamps, but the Greek word Matthew uses is not lychnos, the small clay oil lamp you might set on a table inside a home, the kind that gives off a modest personal glow in a single room. The Greek word is lampos. Say that out loud. Lampas. And lampos does not mean a small private flame. It means a torch, a wooden staff with oil-soaked rags wrapped around the top, carried high above the head, blazing through the night air, visible from a distance. The same word appears in John 18:3, when the soldiers and officers come to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. They are carrying torches and weapons. These are not delicate candles. These are instruments of visible public light. And that distinction matters more than it might seem. A small lamp is a private thing. You carry it for yourself, to see where you are going, to light your own corner of the room. But a torch is a declaration. It says something to everyone who can see it. It says, I am part of this procession. I belong to this wedding. I am here and I am burning, and I am walking with this groom into this feast. You cannot hide a lampes. You cannot carry one quietly. The whole point is that it is seen. So from the very first word of this parable, Jesus is describing something public, something visible, something that marks you as belonging to the wedding party in a way the whole street can see. And he is about to describe two groups of people who both carried that public fire, and whose difference, when it finally became visible, had nothing to do with their appearance on the outside. Matthew introduces the 10 virgins with two Greek words that your English Bible almost certainly translates as wise and foolish, and those translations are not wrong, but they are thinner than what Matthew actually wrote, and the gap between the translation and the original is exactly where the real weight of this parable lives. The first word is phronimos. It appears in Matthew's Gospel more than in any other New Testament book, and its root is the Greek word phren, which referred not to the brain, but to the seat of perception and understanding, the capacity to read a situation accurately and respond to what you actually see, rather than what you wish were true. A phronimos person does not just have information. A phronimos person has the practical wisdom to act on information before the crisis forces them to. They look at the night ahead. They look at the torch in their hand, and they make an honest calculation. This night will be long. What I am carrying will not be enough. They plan for the world as it actually is, rather than the world as they would prefer it to be. The second word is moros. You recognize it. It is the root of our English word moron, but in Greek it carries a weight that the English has lost through overuse. Moros in the New Testament does not simply mean silly or forgetful or a little careless. It carries a moral dimension. Jesus uses the exact same word in the Sermon on the Mount when he says that anyone who hears his words and does not act on them is like a moros builder who constructs his house on sand. Matthew 7:26. The foolishness there is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of response. The moros builder heard everything the phronimos builder heard. He had access to exactly the same teaching, the same warning, the same clear description of what was coming. He simply chose not to act on it. Moros is not a cognitive problem. It is a seeing problem. The morose person perceives the reality in front of them and then does not adjust to what they have perceived. Now look at the difference between the two groups in this parable with that definition in mind. Both groups of virgins are at the same wedding. Both groups received the same invitation. Both groups knew the groom was coming. Both groups prepared torches and went out to meet him. The difference is not in their commitment to the wedding or in their desire to be part of the procession. The difference is in their honest assessment of what the night ahead might require. The Phronimos virgins looked at the torch in their hand and thought not about the most optimistic scenario, but about the realistic one. They brought extra oil in separate containers alongside their torches. They planned for a wait that was longer than convenient. The morose virgins brought their torches and nothing else. They planned for the night they hoped would come, rather than the night that actually did. And here is what makes that distinction so precise and so uncomfortable. The morose virgins were not hostile to the groom. They were not indifferent to the wedding. They showed up. They carried fire from the outside, standing in the street in the early evening before any of this began. You could not have told the two groups apart. They looked identical. They were both there. They were both holding torches. They were both waiting for the same person. The difference that would eventually separate them was invisible to everyone around them, and possibly even to themselves. They were not different on the outside. They were different in what they had decided to carry into the dark. And that difference, invisible for months of ordinary waiting, would only become visible at midnight. Not because the midnight created it, because the midnight revealed it. Here is what most people miss about this parable. The crisis is not what produces the separation. The crisis is only what makes the separation impossible to ignore any longer. What the midnight cry does is hold up a light to something that was already true long before the shout rang out in the street. The oil was either there or it was not, and it had been there or not for every hour of the long ordinary wait that preceded the crisis. The midnight only removed the possibility of hiding it. Here is the moment in the parable that almost everyone reads too quickly. The midnight cry comes. Matthew 25:6. At midnight there was a shout. The Greek word for that shout is krauge, a raw, loud cry, the kind that cuts through sleep, the kind your body responds to before your mind has processed what it heard. The bridegroom is here. Come out to meet him. And all 10 virgins do exactly the same thing, every single one of them. Verse 7 says, they all rose and cosmioed their torches. Your English Bible says they trimmed their torches, but the Greek word cosmio is richer than that single translation captures, and once you see what it actually means, this moment in the parable becomes something entirely different. Cosmio is the root of our English words, cosmos and cosmetics. It means to put in order, to arrange, to make beautiful, to prepare something so that it is ready to be seen. When Paul writes in Titus 2 verse 10 about adorning the doctrine of God, he uses cosmio. When Revelation 21 verse 2 describes the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband, it uses the same word. So at midnight, all 10 virgins wake from sleep, and all 10 of them cosmio their torches. They arrange them. They prepare them. They make them beautiful and ready for the procession. It is a hopeful moment. For one verse, every person in the story is doing the same thing, moving toward the same goal, preparing for the same arrival. And then the crisis reveals the fault line. The foolish virgins look at their torches and see what they were hoping they would not have to see. The flame is going out. The Greek verb is spenemi, to quench, to extinguish, to cause a fire to die. And here is the connection that stops careful readers cold. Spenimi is the exact same word Paul uses in 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 19, when he writes, "Do not quench the Spirit." Do not spenimi the Spirit. The flame that was supposed to mark the foolish virgins as members of the wedding party is dying, and the New Testament uses the exact same word to describe what happens when a person suppresses, neglects, or starves the work of the Holy Spirit in their life. The fire goes out the same way in both cases, not all at once, not in a dramatic moment of decision, slowly, through inattention, through assuming it will sustain itself without being fed. You have felt a version of this, the season when something that was once alive in you began to feel distant without any single moment you can point to when it changed. The prayer life that was once natural, and then became effortful, and then became occasional, and then became something you thought about doing. The part of you that once burned with something you could not fully explain, and that now, when you reach for it, feels quieter than you remember it being. It does not always announce itself. It dims, and you tell yourself it will come back. And then one day, something happens that requires you to produce fire you assumed was still there, and you find yourself standing at midnight, reaching for oil you spent a long time not thinking about refilling. The foolish virgins do not discover their problem because they are careless people. They discover it because the moment arrived that required them to produce something they had been assuming was there without regularly checking. They had been at the wedding waiting for months. During the easy daylight hours, they looked exactly like the wise virgins. Their torches had been burning, but a torch burns oil, and oil does not replenish itself, and while everyone was sleeping, the long wait had been consuming what they had without anyone noticing. And now, watch what happens next. Because the response of the wise virgins to the request that follows is one of the most misread moments in all of Jesus' teaching. The foolish virgins turn to the wise ones and ask for oil. "Give us some of yours, because our torches are going out." And the wise virgins say no, not harshly, not cruelly, but clearly. "There is not enough for both of us and for you. Go to those who sell it and buy for yourselves." And at first, reading that refusal can feel uncomfortably cold. These are members of the same wedding party. They have been waiting together for months, and in the moment of crisis, the wise ones will not share what they have. But the wisdom of their refusal is not selfishness. It is honesty about the nature of what oil represents. There are things in this life you can share: knowledge, encouragement, resources, time, presence. But the oil in this parable is not that kind of thing. And the parable is about to tell you exactly what kind of thing it is. Here is the part of this story that most Bible teachers do not say out loud, not because it is obscure or difficult to find, because it is uncomfortable, and uncomfortable things have a way of being quietly set aside before they reach the people who most need to hear them. Go back to the first verse of Matthew 25, all the way back to the word that was planted at the beginning of this conversation, the word most readers step over without pausing. Matthew 25, verse 1 says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins." The Greek word is parthenoi, virgins, and in the first century Jewish context, that word did not refer to random young women standing in the street. It referred specifically to the attendants of the bride, the companions of the wedding party, the women whose role and identity were defined entirely by their relationship to the celebration. These are not outsiders. These are not people who rejected the wedding invitation. These are not skeptics or pagans or people who never heard the message. These are the people who were already inside the story. already identified with the groom, already carrying his fire through the streets. This parable is not a warning about the world. It is a warning about the church. This is not a story about people who never showed up. This is not a story about people who heard the invitation and walked away. This is a story about people who came to the wedding, who carried torches, who waited through the long ordinary hours, who woke at midnight and did everything right in that moment, and who still found themselves outside a closed door saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." And this should stop every person who has ever sat in a church service, sung the songs, heard the teaching, and assumed that the presence of those activities was the same thing as the presence of the oil. Now look at what Jesus does in Matthew 7, just 2 chapters earlier in the same gospel. He describes a group of people who stand before him on the day of judgment and say, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name?" These are not people with a casual relationship to religious activity. They prophesied, they cast out demons, they performed miracles in the name of Jesus, and his answer to them is the most terrifying sentence in the Sermon on the Mount. "I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." The Greek word there is ginosko. I never knew you in the sense of intimate, experiential, ongoing relationship. And then look at Matthew 25, verse 12. The response of the bridegroom to the foolish virgins knocking at the closed door, "I do not know you." But the Greek word there is different. It is oida. I do not recognize you. I do not acknowledge you as belonging to me. The bridegroom is not saying he has no information about these women. He is saying he does not see them as his own. They were not in the procession. They were not carrying fire when it mattered. And in their absence, a relationship that appeared to exist from the outside was revealed as something the bridegroom never acknowledged as real. This is not a story about people who were never religious. It is a story about people who were very religious and whose religion had become untethered from the oil that was supposed to fuel it. They had the form, they had the attendance record, they had the torches, but somewhere in the long ordinary wait, the thing that sustained the fire had been quietly consumed without anyone refilling it, and the midnight cry did not create that problem. It only made it impossible to hide any longer. This is the thing most channels will not say about this parable, because it is not a comfortable message to deliver to an audience that is already here. But Jesus told it, and he told it to his disciples on the Mount of Olives days before the cross, not to warn the pagans in Jerusalem, but to warn the people sitting right in front of him. If you are watching this, you are probably already at the wedding. You already identify with the procession. The question Jesus is pressing right here in this parable is not whether you showed up. It is what you have been carrying during the long ordinary hours when nobody was checking. The foolish virgins go to buy oil. They leave the street, and while they are gone, the bridegroom arrives. The wise virgins enter the feast with him. And then Matthew records 5 Greek words that carry more weight than almost any other 5 words in the entire parable. Auditur ekleiste, and the door was shut. The verb is eklesin. It is an aorist passive form, and the grammar matters more here than it usually does. The aorist tense in Greek describes a completed action, something that happened at a specific moment and is now done. The passive voice tells you the door was shut by someone with authority, not by accident, not by the wind, not by neglect. Someone with the power to shut it reached out and shut it, and the aorist does not leave room for the door to drift back open. This is not a door that swings. This is not a door that can be negotiated. The moment it shut, it stayed shut. and everything on the wrong side of it stayed on the wrong side. The foolish virgins return. They knock, "Lord, Lord, open to us," and the answer they receive is the one we already examined. The oida, the "I do not recognize you as belonging to me." And then Matthew 25, verse 13, delivers the command Jesus closes the parable with. Gregorio, therefore, for, neither the day nor the hour. Your English Bible says watch, but Gregorio means more than passive observation. It means to stay awake, to be vigilant, to remain alert and active in your preparation. It is the same word Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 13, when he writes, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong." The same word Peter uses in 1 Peter 5, verse 8, when he writes, "Be sober-minded, be watchful." Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion. Gregorio is not passive waiting. It is an active posture of maintained readiness, and the tension in the command is that all 10 virgins fell asleep. Matthew 25, verse 5 records it plainly. They all became drowsy and slept. The command to Gregorio is not a command to never close your eyes. It is a command to be the kind of person who, when awakened, has something to burn. Now pay attention to something that runs much deeper than this single parable. The door that shuts in Matthew 25 is not the first door in Scripture to close with permanent and final authority. It is part of a pattern that runs from the first book of the Bible to the last. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Go all the way back to Genesis 7, verse 16. After Noah and his family entered the ark with every kind of animal, the text says something that most readers walk past without stopping. And the Lord shut him in, not Noah, not Noah's sons. The Lord himself closed the door. For 100 years, the ark had been visible to everyone who lived nearby. The warning had been audible for decades. And when the rain came, the door was already sealed from the outside by the one who built the whole thing. Everyone on the wrong side of that door had heard the warning. Some of them may have believed it in a general way, but the door closed before they reached it. Move forward to Exodus 12. The night of the Passover, the Israelites smear blood on the doorposts of their homes. The angel of death passes through Egypt that night, and the judgment falls on every household not marked by blood. But notice what the text does not say. It does not say the judgment fell on households where the people had bad theology or wrong intentions. It fell on households where the blood was not applied. The mark had to be visible. It had to be on the door before the angel arrived, not during the crisis, before it. And then Isaiah 22, verse 22, the Lord gives the key of the house of David to a faithful steward. And he shall open, and none shall shut. And he shall shut, and none shall open. That image flows directly into Revelation 3, verse 7, where Jesus identifies himself to the church in Philadelphia. These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. The pattern across the entire biblical narrative is unmistakable. From Genesis to Revelation, there are moments when a door closes with an authority that belongs to one person alone. And once it closes, the question of what side you were on is not a question anymore. It is an answer, not a comfortable answer, but a final one. The bridegroom in Matthew 25 is not a capricious gatekeeper looking for reasons to exclude people. He is the one who holds the key of David. And the wedding feast he has prepared is real, and the door to it is real, and the moment it closes is real. And the parable Jesus told on the Mount of Olives 2 days before his death was his way of saying that the door being open right now is not the same thing as the door being open forever. So what is the oil Jesus does not decode the allegory. He ends the parable with a command and leaves the symbol open. But the biblical vocabulary of oil is not ambiguous, and it has been building across thousands of years of Scripture before Matthew 25 arrives. If you trace what oil does in the Bible, where it appears and why, a picture emerges that is more specific and more personal than most readings of this parable allow. In Exodus 27, verse 20, God gives Moses a command that will define the rhythm of the tabernacle for generations. The Israelites are to bring pure beaten olive oil to keep the lamps of the menorah burning continually. Not occasionally, not when they remember, continually. Every evening the priests return to the lampstand, trim the wicks, pour fresh oil, and ensure that the light of God's presence in the sanctuary never goes dark. This was not a task you completed once and walked away from. It was a daily act of maintenance, a daily decision to keep the flame alive in the place where God dwelt. The oil did not sustain itself. The light did not sustain itself. Someone had to come back every day and make sure the vessel was full. In Exodus 30, the anointing oil consecrates priests and sacred objects for service. It marks them as set apart, belonging to God, authorized for the work they are called to do. In 1 Samuel 16, verse 13, when Samuel anoints David, the text says, "The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward." The oil does not contain the Spirit, but the oil marks the person on whom the Spirit rests. And in Zechariah 4, the prophet sees a vision of a golden lampstand fed by 2 olive trees, and the angel explains what it means, "Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts." Zechariah 4, verse 6, the oil is not the Spirit, but the oil points to the sustaining, ongoing, daily supply of the Spirit that keeps the light burning. This is why the wise virgins cannot share their oil with the foolish ones. And this is what most readings of that moment get wrong. The wise virgins are not being stingy. They are not hoarding something they could afford to give away. They are stating a fact about the nature of the thing being asked for. There are dimensions of a person's inner life with God that are irreducibly personal. No one else's prayer life sustains your flame. No one else's relationship with the Spirit keeps your torch burning. You can sit in a room full of people whose lamps are blazing, people who love the same bridegroom and are waiting for the same arrival, and still be in the dark, because their oil does not transfer to your vessel. It never has. It never will. Think about what happens when a city loses power at night. Not for a few minutes, for hours. The first moments feel almost manageable. People find candles, pull out phones, tell themselves it will come back on. But as the hours stretch and the darkness holds, something shifts. The difference between a household that had built habits of preparedness and one that assumed the power would stay on becomes practically and immediately real. Not because the power outage created the difference between those two households. The difference existed long before the grid went down. It existed in every ordinary evening when one household thought ahead and one household assumed. The wise virgins were not paranoid. They were not anxious about things that had not yet happened. They were simply honest about one thing. The night is real. The delay is possible. And the flame I am carrying is not self-sustaining. That honesty is not fear. It is the beginning of wisdom. And there is something in that honesty that points to exactly what the oil represents. Because Zechariah 4 verse 6 makes clear that the oil does not come from human effort. It flows from God's Spirit. But it has to be received continually, daily. In the ordinary hours when nobody is watching and the bridegroom feels far away and the waiting has become so familiar that you have stopped thinking about whether the vessel is still being filled. And this is where it gets remarkable, because the same Jesus who tells this parable also presents himself in Hebrews as the great high priest who lives always to make intercession for those who come to God through him. Hebrews 7, verse 25. His work did not end at the cross. The cross was the sacrifice, but the ongoing ministry, the mediation, the sustaining of the relationship between God and the people who belong to him, that work continues. The fire does not sustain itself because a priest keeps the oil flowing. And in the heavenly sanctuary, the priest is still at work. The question this parable presses is whether you are living as someone who is connected to that supply, or as someone who was filled once and assumed it would be enough forever. If this is landing somewhere real for you tonight, the most helpful thing you can do right now is share it with one person who has been feeling the distance, who has been reaching for a flame they assumed was still burning. That is genuinely how more people find this kind of content. And we are not done yet, because the one word at the beginning of this parable that we have been carrying through this entire conversation is about to resolve, and it changes the final lesson completely. We said at the very beginning that there is one word in this parable that changes who the whole story is actually about. One word, sitting in Matthew 25, verse 1, that most readers step over without pausing. The word is parthenoi, virgins, and in the first century Jewish world, that word carried a specific meaning that the English translation has allowed to blur. Parthenoi referred to young women who had dedicated themselves to a life of purity and devotion, women who in the context of this parable were not random bystanders, but consecrated attendants, women specifically set apart to accompany the bride and the bridegroom into the feast. In the language of the New Testament, the church is described as the bride of Christ. But in this parable, Jesus does not place his followers in the role of the bride. He places them in the role of the parthenoi, the companions of the bride, the people already set apart, already consecrated, already identified with the wedding, and carrying its fire through the dark streets. This is not a warning aimed at the streets. This is a warning aimed at the attendants, at the people who are already at the wedding, at the people who already know the groom is coming, at the people holding the torches, and that changes the three lessons this parable leaves us with. The first is this: showing up is not the same as being ready. Every one of the 10 virgins showed up. Every one of them carried fire. Every one of them waited through the same long, ordinary hours. Showing up to the wedding is not the thing the parable rewards. The parable rewards what you decided to carry in the ordinary hours before the crisis arrived. You can attend every service and read the right books and say the right things and carry a torch that everyone around you can see burning and still discover at midnight that you have been consuming what you were never refilling. Showing up at the wedding is the beginning of the story. It is not the end of it. The second is this: the oil cannot be borrowed at midnight. Whatever the oil represents in your own life, the time to fill the vessel is not when the crisis is already visible. It is in the long, unglamorous, ordinary hours before the crisis arrives. Not because God is withholding what you need when the need is urgent, but because the habits of the ordinary hours are what determine whether the vessel is full when the midnight cry comes. The wise virgins were not wiser than the foolish ones in their intelligence or their devotion or even their love for the groom. They were more honest about one thing. They were more willing to plan for the night as it actually was, rather than the night they hoped for. And that honesty, practiced day after day in the quiet hours when nobody was watching, is what the lamp was still burning from when the procession finally arrived. The third is the one that matters most. The door in this parable is still open. Jesus told this story 2 days before the cross, while there was still time to check the vessel, while the procession had not yet arrived, while the oil was still available to anyone who would go and receive it. He did not tell this parable after the door had closed. He told it before. And the reason a warning this serious is also an act of extraordinary kindness is that a warning only has power when the thing being warned against can still be avoided. Jesus is not standing at a closed door telling you what you should have done. He is sitting on a hillside in the daylight, saying, "The midnight is coming, and there is still time, and here is what you need to know before it arrives." They were not wicked. They were just late to the only appointment that mattered. The procession is still moving through the streets. The fire is still being offered to anyone who will receive it. And the bridegroom, whose arrival will make every dark street blaze with light, has not yet come. But when he does, the only question that will matter is not whether you were at the wedding. It is whether your torch is still burning. Before you close this, I want to ask you one question. Of all the things we looked at in this parable today, which one landed closest to something real in your own life? The midnight that revealed something you did not know was dimming. The oil you assumed was still there until a moment required you to produce it. The long, ordinary hours of waiting where the habits you were building turned out to matter more than you realized. Or something else entirely. Leave your answer in the comments, not because there is a right answer, but because you might find that someone else down there wrote exactly what you were carrying into this video. If this changed how you read Matthew 25, share it with one person who has been feeling the distance and cannot name why. Subscribe if you want to keep going this deep into the words Jesus actually said. We will see you in the next one.